Uncle Trev's Birthday by Jack Lasenby. I used to have a birthday, said Uncle Trev, but I gave it away. What do you mean? I asked him. I worked out what age I wanted to be for the rest of my life, said Uncle Trev. And when I reached it, I gave my birthday away, and I've stuck to that age ever since. What happened to your old birthday? I told you. Gave it away. To an old swagger. Uncle Trev looked at me and nodded. You see, he said, I'd bought some steers out of Tepoi and was driving them home. It wasn't my fault the steers ran over the top of them. Fancy a man going to sleep in broad daylight in the piggin, on the side of the road where everybody drives their cattle. It wasn't the steers' fault. They couldn't see him there. They dented his billy, flattened his hat, ripped his old coat and blanket. He was a right mess. Was he badly hurt? Nah, he was okay. Those swaggers, they're pretty tough. They have to be. No, he leapt up out of the piggin and gave me the rough side of his tongue. He called me everything, and all the time it was his fault for going to sleep on the side of the road. I ask you, where else could a man drive his cattle? Are you sure he wasn't hurt? Uncle Trev looked at me. Of course I'm sure, he said. A man who's been hurt doesn't kick a steer in the backside for running over him. And what about his billy? Oh, I fixed him up. Told him to call the farm, and he arrived at tea time. Those swaggers, they can smell a feed cooking across half the Waikato. Anyway, I tuckered him and let him sleep in the spare room. Next morning, I gave him a new billy, a blanket, an old overcoat of mine, and a pair of boots that still had the power of wear left in them. Well, did he thank you? Yep, he was that grateful he stood there with tears in his eyes, called down heaven's blessing on my head. Did you give him anything else? Well, I filled one pocket of the overcoat with rolled oats so he could cook himself some porridge. I gave him some tea leaves, sugar, salt, and a loaf of bread, and what was left of a leg of mutton we'd had the night before. I still wasn't sure. But how did you give him your birthday? I asked. How do you think? Said Uncle Trev. I wrote it down, the date of my birthday, stuck it in the bottom of the pocket before I filled it with rolled oats, and I stood there and watched him put it on. He was going to Tauranga, and I had to come into Waharoa, so I dropped him at the foot of the Kaimai Road. By the time he found my birthday in the bottom of his pocket, he'd be over the Tauranga side of the hill, and he couldn't give it back to me, not even if he wanted to. What date was your birthday? I asked. 13th of April, said Uncle Trev. Thought about that for a moment, and he watched me. I was 25 then, said Uncle Trev. I've stayed 25 ever since I gave my birthday to that old swagger. It's quite a good age, really, he said. That mean the swagger would have 2 birthdays, I said. That's right, Uncle Trev explained, and he'd get old twice as fast. He'd be twice as old as me now, whereas I've just stayed the same age. Before going to bed that night, I asked Mum if you could have 2 birthdays. Course not, she said. She was darning socks and didn't even look at me. How old are you, Mum? I asked. She looked up. I'm as old as my tongue and older than my teeth, she said. It was what she always said when I asked her that question. Uncle Trev's only 25, I told her. He said so. Rubbish, my mother said. True, Mum. He said he's been 25 ever since he gave his birthday away to an old swagger. I've told you about your uncle and his stories, said my mother. Gave away his birthday indeed. The idea. But he did. He said so. He wrote April the 13th on a bit of paper and stuck it in the old swagger's pocket. Ever since then, he stayed the same age. My mother held her head on one side, as if she was biting a piece of cotton, but she was actually holding the needle in her mouth, a sock in one hand, with a big potato inside it so she could see the hole she was just about to darn. She took the needle out of her mouth and said, Sometimes I wonder about you. I really do. Your uncle, she said, wasn't born on April 13th. He was born on April 1st, April Fool's Day. That's why he's a fool, and why he'll always be one. April 13th, she said, still staring hard at me. That's my birthday, and well, he knows it, just as you'd have remembered it, if only you'd thought for a moment. I looked away from her, guiltily. Sometimes, my mother said, still looking hard at me, sometimes I wonder if you weren't born on April Fool's Day too.